It's there in the story of the birth of Jesus. And basically the Exodus story is a follow the leader story. The pillar of cloud and fire is the leader, and it's God leading the way to the promised land.
As you start to look at this, it becomes clearer and clearer that the Lord and his angels exist in the physical universe. Maybe in other places too, but at least now we know that they're here.
The supposition of the church has always been that everything was done by the supernatural power of God, kind of an energy that can do anything it wants to. And I suppose if you want to go that route, it's okay. As we move ahead in our own technology, we don't know the world of the angels doesn't use technology.
When you're thinking, oh, God couldn't possibly use technology. And then I realized, well, we are his children. I mean, even the dark angels are his children. And so that ability and that desire to explore and to expand and learn is part of our godliness, is part of our divineness. So it's when we look at ourselves and say, yes, we are the children of God, and yes, we are going into space, and yes, we are using technology, because God's angels use technology, and God uses it as well.
The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that's reported in Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 and 22 in fullest detail. And it's said that the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night led the Exodus. It hovered above the ground. It was cloud-like during the day. It glowed in the dark. Some of the modern cloud cigars have been reported to be bigger than our battleships, maybe a quarter of a mile long, and that they would serve as the mothership for the smaller flying saucer type UFOs. The ascension of Jesus is spoken of in Acts chapter 1, and it basically says that Jesus had some parting words for the disciples, and then he was lifted up into the air in a cloud, and the two angels or men stood by and said, "This Jesus whom you see going into heaven will return in the same way." So the doctrine of the second coming of Christ was established right there at the beginning of chapter 1 in Acts. It's interesting that however it was that we might suppose Jesus went away at that time, he returns in a somewhat similar way in Acts chapter 9 when the Apostle Paul, who is persecuting the Christian church and on his way to Damascus to put Christians in jail, when suddenly a bright light hovers over him and the company that was with him on the road to Damascus, and he hears a voice speaking to him, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he answers back with a question, "Who are you, Lord?" And the answer is, "I'm Jesus whom you are persecuting." So the means by which Jesus returns to earth on the Damascus road seems to be consistent with the way he went away at the time of the ascension. Perhaps the most detailed UFO report in the Bible is in the book of Ezekiel. And here the UFO itself is referred to as being like burnished bronze, so it has a metallic appearance. It probably has landing gear, it appears. And so the way in which it's described, it even has eyes around it, and being like a wheel within a wheel is a pretty good description of what some modern flying saucer type UFOs have been reported to appear and so on.
What I did was, in the first chapter of Ezekiel, I just took a pencil and a piece of paper and I sketched out the description. And when I drew those eyes, of course, around the outside of the rim, it was like looking at a 1950s version of a flying saucer, right?
Ezekiel, an Old Testament prophet of the 6th century BC, has left a record of his encounters with God and of the interaction that ensued. With many of his people, he was taken captive to Mesopotamia, where, according to scripture, the first encounter occurred. Artists throughout the ages have depicted this encounter as they saw it.
And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst of it like the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like the color of a beryl, and they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rims, they were so high that they were dreadful, and their rims were full of eyes round about them four.
Coming to realize that God has come into the universe as a physical being was a great revelation to me.
The biblical view of angels was they could be very human-like. In fact, you might not be able to tell the difference between an ordinary human and an angel. And that, in fact, goes way back to Abraham in the book of Genesis, where three men came to meet with Abraham and eventually foretold the birth of his son Isaac. Abraham come to understand that these were agents of God or angels of God.
Suddenly, the existence of the Lord's angels on our planet became very real. And the possibility of meeting them, because our scripture says, you may entertain an angel unawares. And so suddenly that becomes not some sort of ethereal event, but rather a real person actually coming and visiting, in this case.
The angels in the Bible usually appeared in human form, and appeared very briefly, as in the case of the angel that descended from heaven and rolled back the stone at the tomb of Jesus and then sat upon it. Obviously, you're to understand that this being is very human-like. And there's no report there actually of the angel having any wings. And in fact, there's a passage in the book of Hebrews which says, "Be sure to entertain strangers, because thereby some have entertained angels unawares." It seems to me that the doctrine of the resurrection suggests that we humans will end up in a world, a heavenly world, in which we have bodies. That's what the Apostle Paul seems to promise in 1 Corinthians 15 in his long statement on the resurrection of the body. And of course, the resurrection of the body of Jesus is meant to confirm that idea that we're not just going to be the spirits that have no dimension, but we're going to have bodies, a spiritual body, but nevertheless a body that could be touched the way Thomas and the others touched the body of Jesus.
See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Luke 24:39.
The Bible speaks of a spiritual, physical body. The idea that God and angels take this shape simply to interact with humans is beyond the scope of the biblical text. In our culture, some scientists speculate that the key to immortality may lie in DNA.
At first I was thinking, how is it possible for God to be a person, right? Like in a body? When we think of God as being omnipresent and omnipotent everywhere, inside and outside of all things. How is this possible? And so the mind tends to go to the extreme, the large, the imperceivable, right? when we think about God. And so what I found, began to realize what I was doing, was I was limiting God's power. I was saying to myself, no, God couldn't do this. Because he is so big and inconceivable, how could he be a person? And then I realized what Christ said, with God, all things are possible. And so when I thought that God had created this universe and then entered into it,